The Empire believed the death of a child would silence the rebellion. But in the cold, abandoned streets of a devastated city, the final cry of innocence became the rallying call for something far worse. A fury that would tear through the galaxy, and a mother who would make them regret the day they ever raised their hand against her child. The cry of a dying child echoed through the cold, darkened streets of the devastated city. It wasn't a cry of innocence or fear. It was a cry of a child who had already seen too much, lived through more horrors than anyone should. And yet, it would be the last sound the Galactic Empire ever heard before they learned that they had made a terrible mistake. The Empire thought it had won. On a world far from the eyes of the Galactic Council, a small human settlement lay in ruins, decimated by the ruthless Imperial forces. A child barely 12 was their final target. His name was Kian, and though he was just a boy, his existence held the key to a rebellion that could shatter the Empire's hold over the galaxy. His death, they believed, would end the spark of resistance forever. They couldn't have been more wrong. Kian was already dead when the soldiers found him. Their mission had been simple: kill the child and burn the remnants of any rebellion. But Kian wasn't just any child. He was the son of General Sarah Calloway, one of humanity's most feared leaders, a woman whose name alone could send shivers down the spines of even the most seasoned Empire generals. A woman who, until now, the Empire had thought was dead. When the Empire's soldiers raided his home, Kian fought back with a ferocity that matched the legends of his mother. His tiny hands wielded weapons meant for adults, and his mind, sharp as any general's, mapped out escape routes and ambush points. They killed him anyway, believing his mother's absence meant her legacy was finished. But Sarah Calloway was very much alive. It was just another ordinary day on the war-torn frontier when she received the news. A coded message, intercepted by a fleet of mercenaries loyal to her cause, came through the communication line. At first, Sarah thought the message was a trick, a cruel joke. She read the words again, her breath caught in her throat. The Empire killed Kian. Her pulse quickened, but it wasn't just grief she felt. It was something much darker. The rage that surged within her felt like a tidal wave, sweeping away everything in its path. They had crossed the line, the one that separated her from the human she used to be. They had killed her son, a child who had never known peace, a child who was too young to understand the true meaning of war, and yet they had turned him into a martyr for the rebellion. Her hand slammed against the console, her mind working faster than it ever had before. The Empire thought they had extinguished the spark of rebellion, but they had only fueled the fire. Every ounce of pain, every shred of loss, every drop of blood spilled in Kian's name would now serve a singular purpose: revenge. The war had changed. No longer would she be a shadowy figure leading from the sidelines. She would rise again, not as the ghost the Empire thought she was, but as a force of nature that would tear apart everything they had built. A fierce smile spread across her lips as she stood before the holographic map of the galaxy. Her eyes, cold and calculating, traced the Empire's most vulnerable points. There would be no mercy this time. She would show the galaxy what happens when you underestimate the wrath of a mother. "You think you've broken me?" she muttered to herself, a low chuckle escaping her lips. "You've just made the mistake of a lifetime." The Empire had only killed a child. What they didn't know was that they had awakened a sleeping giant. Sarah Calloway's war had begun, and this time there would be no retreat, no surrender, no mercy, only blood. The galaxy had heard rumors, whispers of a ghost, a merciless general who had once torn through the heart of the Empire's forces, leaving nothing but devastation in her wake. But those whispers were just that, rumors. After all, the Empire had wiped out her forces years ago. The general was dead. Her name was a memory, or so they thought. The first sign that General Sarah Calloway had returned came in the form of a flash. A rebel outpost on the planet Novaris was razed to the ground in less than an hour. No one survived, but the wreckage told a story. The Empire's loyal forces, sent to quash a small insurgency, found themselves caught in a trap. Their weapons were turned against them, their ships disabled, their communications scrambled. The rebels hadn't done it. It wasn't their tactics, their weapons, or their strength. No, it was something far more terrifying. It was Sarah Calloway. A cold, calculated strike. Swift and brutal. Her methods were a nightmare, known only to those who had fought with her or against her in the past. The Empire's response was swift. Send their best forces to find and eliminate the ghost. But Sarah was no ghost. She was a shadow, a force of nature. And she wasn't hiding. She was hunting. Sarah stood in front of a holographic map on her flagship, the gleaming silver of its sleek design contrasting sharply against the dark expanse of space around them. Her crew was small, mercenaries, ex-soldiers, and refugees from the Empire's many conquests. But they were united by one thing: fear. Fear of what would happen if Sarah Calloway's vengeance was not realized. The general had made her intentions clear from the start. She was no longer just a soldier, no longer just a commander. She was a mother, and the death of her son had forged her into something the Empire had never faced. Set course for the Inner Rim, she commanded, her voice as cold as the void of space. Her crew, well trained in the art of silent obedience, moved to carry out her orders. They knew better than to question her. It wasn't long before her name began to spread across the galaxy again. The Empire's most strategic fleets were sabotaged. Entire divisions lost communication, their ships left floating in deep space, crippled by inexplicable malfunctions. Imperial commanders, who once laughed at the thought of Sarah's return, were now sending encrypted messages back to their superiors, messages filled with fear. Reports of a new, mysterious force began circulating. An unknown fleet, fast and deadly, appeared out of nowhere, striking at the Empire's weakest points. Only one thing was certain: the attacks were all connected, all coordinated, and all pointing to the same person. General Sarah Calloway was alive. The galaxy had forgotten the true extent of her cruelty, the ruthless efficiency with which she operated. She had once led humanity's war against the Empire, and her tactics were legendary. But now she fought for something more. Her son's death was no longer the end of her story. It was the beginning of a new war. But Sarah was not acting alone. As the stories of her brutal attacks reached the farthest corners of the galaxy, they also found their way into the hands of those who would benefit from her vengeance. Old allies, former soldiers from her ranks, and disillusioned citizens of the Empire all answered her call. Some were seeking redemption, others revenge, and a few just wanted to survive. But they all followed Sarah because they knew she was the only one who could bring the Empire to its knees. Among her ranks was a former Empire commander, a man who had once served under her and had witnessed the full scope of her merciless tactics. He had once believed that the Empire was invincible, that no one could challenge its power. But now, standing beside Sarah, he knew better. He had seen the fire in her eyes, the cold fury that burned brighter than any star. He had seen what she could do. "I've seen her at her worst," the commander said to one of the new recruits, his voice low and filled with a mixture of awe and fear. "She's not just a general. She's a force. You don't want to be on the other side of that." The recruit, young and eager, nodded but couldn't quite understand. He had never seen war like this. He had never fought alongside someone like Sarah. But soon he would. As the days passed, Sarah's reach expanded. Each attack was more daring, more ruthless, as she systematically dismantled the Empire's supply lines. The galaxy was beginning to take notice. The Empire's high command, initially dismissing the threat, now understood the truth. Sarah Calloway was not a ghost. She was real, and her vengeance had only just begun. And as her forces continued to grow, so did her reputation. The whispers that began as rumors had become something more. Now across the galaxy, there was only one question on everyone's lips. When would Sarah Calloway strike next? The Empire had made one fatal error. They thought they could control the galaxy with fear. Now, that very fear was about to turn on them. General Sarah Calloway's reputation had spread like wildfire through the ranks of the Empire. What began as whispered rumors had transformed into a brutal, undeniable truth. She was alive. She was hunting. And now, She was striking at the heart of the Empire with a cold vengeance that had yet to be seen. The Empire's response was swift and decisive. They called upon their best: elite assassins, special forces units, and high-ranking commanders. They were confident they could eliminate Sarah before she became a serious threat. But they didn't understand what they were dealing with. Sarah Calloway wasn't just another target. She was a storm, and the storm had already begun to gather. It was on the planet Teleris that the first major clash occurred. The Empire had dispatched a battalion of soldiers to quell a rebel uprising, unaware that Sarah's forces had already infiltrated the area. Within hours, the battalion was decimated. Not by the rebels, but by Sarah's hand. The rebels had been left behind, forgotten in the wake of her fury. Her forces moved with terrifying precision, cutting through the Empire's best soldiers, as if they were nothing more than children playing at war. Sarah's flagship, the Cerberus, sat cloaked just outside the atmosphere of Teleris. From its command deck, Sarah surveyed the chaos unfolding below. She wasn't just a mother out for revenge anymore. She was a general again, and the Empire was about to learn that underestimating her was a mistake they could never recover from. "Report," she said, her voice as cold and sharp as the weapon in her hand. The ship's tactical officer immediately relayed the data. "Sir, the Empire's forces have been decimated. Their battalion is completely wiped out. There's no sign of their elite strike teams. We've taken control of all major communication channels. It's over." Sarah allowed herself a brief, chilling smile. "Good," she said. "Prepare the next wave. We're not finished yet." The battle on Teleris was a message, not just to the Empire, but to the galaxy at large. Sarah was no longer playing by the rules. She had no intention of following the standard conventions of war. Mercy was a luxury she no longer had, and the Empire would soon learn that every move they made was a step closer to their inevitable collapse. Back at the Imperial Command, panic was setting in. High-ranking officials scrambled to find any shred of information that could lead them to Sarah's location, to stop her before she could do any more damage. But they were already too late. Her forces were already on the move, and the galaxy would never be the same. The attacks continued with increasing frequency and ferocity. Imperial supply ships vanished without a trace. Their crews never heard from again. Strategic command centers fell silent, one by one, as Sarah's ships and troops executed surgical strikes with military precision. The Empire's once mighty fleet was left floundering, caught off guard, their power slipping from their grasp. The story of Sarah's resurgence spread beyond the borders of Empire-controlled space. News of the brutal attacks reached the farthest corners of the galaxy, and the whispers that had once only been heard in dark alleys and dimly lit cantinas began to grow louder. Sarah Calloway was no longer a forgotten memory. She was a living nightmare. The fear that had once belonged to the Empire was now being passed on to them. The people of the galaxy were no longer asking if Sarah would strike. They were asking when and how much devastation she would bring with her. In the heart of the Imperial capital, an emergency meeting was called. The highest-ranking officers in the Empire sat around a table, their faces grim as they analyzed the reports of Sarah's attacks. They knew what they had to do. "We send the Deathbringers," one of the officers suggested, his voice low. "They're the only force that can deal with her." The Deathbringers were the Empire's most feared Special Forces unit, an elite group of assassins trained to take down the most dangerous threats the galaxy had to offer. Sarah Calloway was the most dangerous threat, and they knew it. "Prepare the Deathbringers," the commanding officer ordered. "We end this now." But as they issued their commands, one fact remained clear. They were already too far behind. The storm was already here, and the Empire had no idea how to survive it. The Empire thought they understood war, but they had never faced an enemy like Sarah Calloway. And as they scrambled to react, the true horror of their mistake began to unfold. It was in the shadows that Sarah found her power, the places where no one dared to look, where the Empire's filth was buried. She had never been just a soldier, never simply a general. Sarah had always been something more, and now, As her forces grew, the galaxy would learn exactly what that meant. She had a plan, one that would tear the Empire apart from the inside. And she was about to execute it with ruthless precision. The Empire had always been good at hiding their darkest secrets, but Sarah knew better. The key to dismantling their power wasn't just in fighting their armies or conquering their planets. It was in taking away the very foundation on which their empire was built, their experimentation on human subjects. Sarah's fleet arrived at a remote Imperial research station on the edge of known space, hidden beneath the hull of a moon too small to register on any of the Empire's scanners. It was here that the Empire had been conducting their most insidious experiments, testing the limits of human endurance, manipulating genetics, and turning children into weapons. And it was here that Sarah would strike. As her stealth ships approached the station, Sarah stood at the helm of the Cerberus, the flagship that had become the symbol of her return. The air in the control room was thick with anticipation. Every officer aboard her ship had been a part of her past war effort, each one understanding the gravity of the mission they were about to embark on. "All systems ready," the tactical officer reported. "We're in position." Sarah's icy gaze never left the holographic display. She studied the station's weak points, the areas where Imperial defenses were lax, where their arrogance had led them to believe they were untouchable. She had no time for mercy. This mission wasn't about reclaiming territory or making a statement. It was about sending a message. And she wasn't going to let anything get in her way. "Initiate Phase 1, she commanded, her voice as cold as the void of space itself. The first wave of her forces descended on the station. Small, precise strikes crippled the station's power systems, shutting down the shields and rendering its defenses useless. Imperial personnel scrambled to respond, but they were unprepared. Sarah's forces hit with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel, taking down key infrastructure before the Empire could mount any resistance. They moved like shadows, unseen and unstoppable, a perfect reflection of Sarah's own wrath. Inside the station, the chaos was just beginning. Imperial scientists rushed to secure their most valuable assets, the human children who had been bred, manipulated, and tortured for the Empire's twisted experiments. These children were no longer just victims, they were tools. Weapons created to enforce the Empire's rule, made from the DNA of humans and other alien species, modified to be stronger, faster, and more resilient than any natural-born being. Sarah had always known that the Empire was experimenting on humans. She had seen the whispers of it in the darkest corners of military archives. But what she uncovered that day was far worse than she could have imagined. The Empire had been breeding these children for generations, each batch more perfected than the last. And they were not only training them to be soldiers, they were training them to be the ultimate weapon. Super soldiers who could never be defeated, programmed for nothing but death. But what the Empire didn't know was that Sarah had been preparing for this day for years. She had been gathering intel, pulling strings, and collecting evidence. She had infiltrated the highest levels of the Empire, using the same ruthlessness that had earned her her reputation. As Sarah's forces breached the station's inner sanctum, they discovered the full scope of the Empire's plans. The children, locked in cryogenic chambers, were being conditioned, their minds manipulated and rewritten to serve the Empire's needs. These were no ordinary soldiers. These were beings designed to be perfect, perfectly obedient, perfectly lethal, perfectly expendable. Sarah's eyes narrowed. This wasn't just about vengeance anymore. It was about justice. And as the station's walls crumbled, revealing the children locked inside their chambers, Sarah felt the fire of determination burn hotter within her. "Get them out," she ordered, her voice unwavering. "Free them all." Her troops moved swiftly, releasing the children from their restraints and pulling them from their chambers. There were dozens of them, all different ages, all with the same haunted look in their eyes. These were the Empire's forgotten weapons, the ones who had never been given a choice. But Sarah was about to change that. "These children will have the chance to live," Sarah muttered under her breath. "Not as tools, not as weapons, but as people." As her forces moved through the research facility, disabling the Empire's final defenses. Sarah's mind raced. She was seeing the galaxy in a new light. The Empire's grip on the galaxy had been built on lies, on broken lives, and on manipulating the very people they claimed to protect. But no more. By the time Sarah and her forces had fully taken control of the station, the Empire's secrets had been exposed. The data, the files, the records of every experiment, Sarah had it all. It was time to take it to the galaxy. Time for everyone to know the truth. As she stood in the wreckage of the station, surrounded by the children she had freed, Sarah felt something shift within her. This was no longer just about revenge for her son. It was about something greater, something that would bring the Empire to its knees. The storm was coming, and this time there was no hiding. The Empire's greatest mistake was thinking that the human spirit could be broken. Sarah Calloway had once been a general. Now she was a force of nature, a storm that could not be contained. The news of her recent attack on the Imperial Research Station spread like wildfire, reaching every corner of the galaxy. In the wake of her strike, the Empire was reeling. Their darkest secrets were no longer buried. The children they had turned into weapons were now free, and the evidence of their cruel experiments was out in the open for the galaxy to see. But Sarah's war had only just begun. Her forces, a coalition of mercenaries, former soldiers, and disillusioned aliens, continued to grow stronger. Every victory against the Empire's weak points added more fuel to the fire. The galaxy's oppressed people began to rally around her banner, their voices rising in unison with her own, demanding an end to the Empire's reign. Sarah stood at the helm of the Cerberus, her flagship, her eyes cold and calculating as she watched the galaxy's stars shift before her. She wasn't just leading an uprising. She was dismantling an empire. "Report," she commanded, her voice sharp and unwavering. The tactical officer at her side quickly relayed the information. "We've intercepted communications from the Imperial High Command. They're aware of our forces' movements. They're sending reinforcements to key systems in the Outer Rim." Sarah's lips curled into a slight, knowing smile. Good. Let them come. The Empire's reinforcements were what they had always relied on: overwhelming force, endless numbers. But Sarah knew better. She knew that their numbers meant nothing when facing a force fueled by purpose. And now, her purpose was clearer than ever: to make the Empire feel the same terror, the same powerlessness that they had inflicted on so many. The Cerberus and its fleet slipped into the Outer Rim, undetected by Imperial patrols. Sarah's forces had grown proficient at striking quickly and disappearing into the darkness of space. No one knew where they would hit next, and that was exactly how Sarah wanted it. The Empire couldn't prepare for what they couldn't predict. As they entered the first target system, a heavily fortified Imperial station on the edge of the rim, Sarah's plan unfolded with deadly precision. The Empire's defenses were formidable, but they had one glaring weakness: their arrogance. They believed their control was absolute, that no one, least of all a single human general, could threaten them. But Sarah wasn't just any general. Her fleet, now a ghostly force of mercenaries and defectors, swooped in on the station without warning. Her forces disabled the station's power grid, trapping the defenders in darkness. Within minutes, they had secured the facility, and the Empire's reinforcements, distracted by the attack, were left scrambling. Sarah stood at the heart of the operation, coordinating every move. She didn't need to be everywhere at once. Her forces moved like extensions of her will, every action designed to send a clear message to the Empire. This was only the beginning. As the station fell into her hands, she gave the order for a public broadcast. The galaxy needed to see what the Empire had tried to hide. She stood before a live-feed camera, her face hard, her eyes filled with the weight of a promise that would soon be realized. "The Empire has built its empire on lies, on blood, and on cruelty," she said, her voice unwavering. "But now its walls are crumbling. The time has come for the galaxy to see the truth. The time has come for the Empire to fall." The broadcast ended, and Sarah turned to her crew. "We leave no stone unturned. We cripple their supply lines, disable their warships, and take their strongholds. We make sure they feel every loss, every blow, every minute of this war. And we won't stop until they're broken. The Empire had spent years constructing its vast empire, but it had forgotten one simple truth. The greatest weapon in the galaxy was not the fleet, not the technology, not the countless soldiers. It was the human spirit, and it was something they could never control. Sarah Calloway's rise was unstoppable. And she wasn't just fighting for revenge anymore. She was fighting for the galaxy's freedom. Her forces surged forward, prepared to strike at the heart of the Empire's strongest systems. The Empire was now on the defensive, and no one, not even the most powerful emperor, could hide from Sarah's wrath. The storm had begun, and now there was no escaping it. The Empire had one last hope. Their fleet, the largest and most powerful in the galaxy, was ready to make its final stand. But Sarah Calloway had already set the pieces in motion, and no matter how many ships the Empire sent, it wouldn't be enough. The first sign that Sarah's forces had arrived was the silence. For once, there was no gunfire, no explosions, just a deep, unnerving quiet. The Imperial capital had become a ghost town as whispers of Sarah's arrival spread like wildfire. The Empire had long relied on its ability to strike fear into its enemies. The might of their fleet, their armies, their technology, these were the tools that had kept the galaxy in line. But as the sun set on their capital, the last remnants of their control began to fall apart. Sarah stood at the bridge of the Cerberus, staring out into the abyss of space. Her flagship led a fleet of ships that had once been enemies, mercenaries, defectors, rebels, united under one banner: the fall of the Empire. The time for subtlety, for surgical strikes, had passed. The galaxy was watching. The war had reached its climax, and Sarah was about to deliver the final blow. Fleet status. Sarah's voice was cold, her eyes unblinking as she focused on the target ahead. Shields up, weapons primed, the tactical officer replied. We're ready to initiate the assault. Then let's end this, Sarah said, her voice as steady as a glacier. All ships, prepare for battle. The Empire had underestimated her every step of the way, from her return to the galaxy to her meteoric rise as a force of vengeance. They thought they had beaten her. They thought they had broken humanity. Now, they would pay for their arrogance. Across the capital, Imperial commanders scrambled to launch their fleets into space. But they were too late. Sarah had already anticipated their every move. The Empire's most powerful ships were stuck in dock, their fleet in disarray, unable to respond in time. The Cerberus and its allies tore through their defenses like a predator closing in on its prey. The battle that ensued was fierce, Imperial warships firing on all cylinders, their heavy artillery aimed at Sarah's fleet. But Sarah's forces were no longer a scattered resistance. They were a well-coordinated unit, each ship a perfect extension of her strategy. As the first wave of Imperial ships fell, Sarah's fleet pressed forward, relentless, unstoppable. Sarah watched as the Empire's flagship, the Dreadnought, the symbol of their power, came into view. The massive ship, once thought invincible, now seemed small in comparison to the fury that was about to be unleashed. Sarah's fleet had taken out their reinforcements, disabled their escape routes, and now the final confrontation would begin. As the Cerberus came within striking range, Sarah gave the order. Target the Dreadnought's central reactor, she commanded. Destroy it. Let them feel the weight of their mistake. A volley of powerful energy blasts surged from the Cerberus, tearing through the Dreadnought's defenses. The first hit struck the reactor's core, sending shockwaves across the battlefield. The Empire's pride and joy shuddered under the assault, the massive ship beginning to break apart under the onslaught. Imperial officers aboard the Dreadnought fought to keep their vessel intact, but the damage was irreversible. As the flagship spiraled into chaos, Sarah's fleet moved in for the kill, cutting through the remaining Imperial forces with brutal efficiency. The battle raged on, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The Empire was crumbling, its forces in disarray, their most formidable warship, now nothing more than a burning hulk drifting in space. Amidst the destruction, Sarah felt no joy, no satisfaction. This had never been about winning battles. It had always been about ending the war. And now, as the last of the Imperial defenses fell, she knew her mission was nearly complete. The galaxy would never be the same. The broadcast came through shortly after the Empire's surrender, live for all to see. Sarah stood before a camera, her expression unyielding, her voice steady. "The Empire is no more," she declared. "Its rule of fear, its reign of terror, it ends today. And let this be a message to all who would think to stand against us. The human spirit cannot be broken. We will rebuild this galaxy, not in their image, but in ours. This is our victory. And it is only the beginning." The screen went black. Across the galaxy, humanity and their allies cheered, their voices rising in unison, shaking the very foundations of the Empire's legacy. The once dominant force in the galaxy had fallen, and Sarah Calloway, mother, general, and victor, stood at the helm of a new era. The storm had passed. The galaxy was free.